Hey, we're in the second part of this series, and all I'm doing in this series is just kind of teeing you up for what's coming next weekend with Dominic, with the psychologist is here. This series we're in is just going to be a short one, but I want you to know this, and you've heard this quote. I've heard it said over the years numerous times. Those who cannot remember the past or refuse to remember the past or what? Are condemned to repeat it. You've heard it said oftentimes that history repeats itself. When we try to erase history, the end result of that is that in and of itself creates a worse present and an even worse future. The Bible is the Word of God. We believe that it is living and it's powerful and, man, it's great. But one of the things about the Bible is that it's also the greatest history book that's ever been written. It's the greatest history book in the world, and it's unfortunate that we don't give it its due diligence in school and when kids study history. There's so much history in the Bible. And there's a lot of things, a lot of the history in the Bible that if it were up to me, we would just kind of erase and get rid of and delete. I mean, there's some things in there that, number one, I don't understand. I can't fully wrap my mind around. And number two, it's kind of embarrassing, to be honest with you. There are things in there that our critics, that those that don't believe in our faith, throw up in our faces whenever they're trying to prove that what we believe is either incorrect or wrong or not true. There's things in the Bible that are hard to understand and hard to deal with and hard to come to terms with. We're going to look at one of those very difficult stories today, and I'm going to warn you, this might be a little rough. Might be a little PG-13 this morning, okay? But this is in the Bible. So we're going to look at the story of Jacob. Jacob. And then we're going to look at the story of Jacob's daughter, Dinah. If you know anything about Jacob, Jacob was Isaac's son. He was the grandson of Abraham. And Jacob had a brother by the name of Esau. Because Esau was born first, it was his right to kind of have and inherit all his father had. That the birthright was to be given, the blessing was to be given to Esau. But what did Jacob do? Jacob and his mother, Rebekah, conspired to trick his father Isaac in his old age to give Jacob the birthright instead of Esau. And then Jacob, upon the advice of his mother Rebekah, flees because Esau was obviously going to come after him, right? When Esau finds out that the birthright, the blessing, his father's, Isaac's blessing had been stolen from him, he obviously would pursue and try to get back at Jacob. So Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother, says, hey man, it's time, you're old enough, it's time for you to go on out, just get out of here, go to your uncle Laban's house and find a wife. So Jacob gets out of town and he goes to his uncle Laban's house. And you can imagine Laban is excited to see Jacob as he arrives. And then Jacob sees Laban's daughter Rachel, who's actually his first cousin. We just don't even need to go there this morning, right? And it's like love at first sight. Jacob loves Rachel. Man, that's the one I want. That's the one that I want for my wife. And so Laban, his uncle, makes a deal with him and says, listen, if you will work 7 years for me, Jacob, I will give to you Rachel as your wife. It was their custom in the time for the father to give the daughter away in marriage. And so he makes that deal, and Jacob agrees, and he honors his word. He works for 7 years. And the time comes for Rachel to be given to Jacob. So Laban calls everyone together for a great feast, at which time he would then give Rachel to Jacob. Apparently, though, Jacob gets inebriated. And Laban, instead of giving Rachel to Jacob, gives him his oldest daughter, Leah, who wasn't as attractive and who was obviously not the one that Jacob wanted. And of course, they do the deed, right? Jacob comes to his senses and realizes what had happened. And of course, He is not happy. It's kind of poetic justice if you think about what he did to his brother Esau. But he cuts a deal, however, with his uncle Laban to take Leah as his wife. And in exchange, he would also get Rachel if he would then agree to work an additional 7 more years for Laban. And so Jacob, loving Rachel like he did, being enthralled with her like he was, agrees to this as well. But look at what it says in Genesis 29, verse 30. So Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. Both were his wives, both were sisters. And as you can imagine, he didn't hide that. And this sparked quite the sibling rivalry between Leah and Rachel. You know, most jealousy springs from sibling rivalry. You got a brother or sister, think about that. Think about how tempting it is to be jealous of your siblings. This was obviously going on here. And just imagine being Leah. Put yourself in Leah's shoes. Imagine how she must have felt. She must have felt horrible. She was not the favorite. Her dad had to basically deceive a man into taking her as his wife. She was second rate. You know, for a while, because God felt sorry for Leah, she was the only one able to give Jacob children. Now, Rachel's eventually able to conceive and give birth, but in the middle of those things, both sisters give their servants to Jacob as wives at some point because neither one of them are able to conceive. And so Jacob has some kids with some servants. Man, this is a train wreck, right? This is better than any reality TV show. I mean, they ought to put this. You don't need to watch TLC or whatever. You can just read the Bible. Talk about drama. Talk about trauma. Folks, trauma is nothing new. And you can imagine now, not only being Leah or being Rachel, but imagine being one of those kids. Imagine how that must have felt. What must they have experienced being a part of this situation? I would imagine that dysfunction was their norm. That's all they knew. It was normal to them, but to us reading it today, we look at it and we say, man, that was nuts. That's dysfunction. This guy marries his cousins and then marries 2 other women that are servants and has all these kids, and this is just nuts. Jacob ends up having 12 sons that we know of, and only one daughter by the name of Dinah that will be particularly interesting to us today. In Genesis 30, verse 21, look at what it says. That sometime later, she, who is Leah, right, gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Dinah. Jacob's only daughter, given to him by Leah, Dinah. Imagine now being the daughter of Leah. Imagine being Dinah. Your mother is not the favorite of your father. You are a girl, and in that culture, that means that you would have been in a second-class category. You were a second-class citizen. Safe to assume that Dinah probably didn't see much of her father. Sure, she was neglected, and she witnessed firsthand the struggles her mother faced. Surely she did. This was a recipe for hurt, for pain, and trauma in both Leah and Dinah's life. I want you to look at what happens in Genesis 34. Very difficult story. It says that one day Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. Now, what's the area? The area is called Shechem. After Jacob gets Rachel as his wife, he starts heading back home, and he has this great thing with Esau where he actually meets up with Esau again, and Esau actually welcomes him and says this very famous line. He says, Jacob, even though you think that I'm out here trying to kill you, seeing you is like seeing the face of God. Esau welcomes Jacob. And then Jacob goes on past. He's trying to get to where God wanted him to be. And then they stop and they settle in this area named Shechem. An area where he is settled. Didn't know much about it. didn't know the people there. They were foreigners to them, possibly dangerous people. Depending on who you read now, this was probably not a place that Dinah should have been. She decides to go out and hang out with some of these Shechemites. She was possibly associating with people who were not her people. Some speculate she was acting out or maybe even running away. And most agree that at the time of this story, Dinah is probably around the age of 13 to 15. Some say that she may be as young as 8 years old. Most agree she's the age 13 to 15. And I want you to see what happens in Genesis 34, verse 2. It says, but when the local prince, Shechem, okay, get this. So the city's name is Shechem. The prince's name is Shechem. And they're called Shechemites. So here we have Prince Shechem, from Shechem, and the Shechemites. Got that? All right. When the local prince Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. Wow. Just stop right there. The unthinkable happens. Dinah, this young girl, is raped by one of these Shechemite men named Shechem. Some of us maybe have that in our past. We have similar trauma. And there's so much hurt wrapped around that. For that, I say, I'm sorry. Dinah experiences this. Dinah has to go through this. Dinah walks through this, but I have to ask the question. I asked the question of myself, as this is going on, as this 13-year-old girl is allowed to go out and run away and be amongst these people she shouldn't have been, where is Daddy? Where's Daddy at? Why is Daddy not there? Where is he at? How do you not know where your 13-year-old daughter is? How do you not know what she is doing? You know, there's this thing that I've learned about in the last year or so, and I believe next week, as Dominic comes, you're going to hear about this a little bit. It's a thing called the father wound. The father wound. According to Focus on the Family, the father wound is this. Basically, it's daddy issues, right? You've heard that? He or she's got daddy issues. That's what that is. The father wound is the absence of love from your birth father. The wound can be caused by things like neglect. You feel like you're unimportant. It can be caused from things like absence. Divorce, separation, death can cause a father wound. It can be caused by abuse, mental, physical, sexual, spiritual abuse. It can be caused by control. Maybe you were oppressed and dominated. It can be caused by the withholding of love. Maybe love was withheld from you, or blessing was withheld from you, or affirmation was withheld from you. The father wound comes through all of these things. And all of these things, if we've experienced this, and I think most of us probably have on some level, lead to the inability of us to accept ourselves as we are. Can I tell you, so much craziness that's going on in our culture right now today has been created because of the father wound. It has been. You show me an issue in our culture, and I will show you where there's a father wound present in that issue. It's in there. The effect of the father wound is low self-esteem, a deep emotional pain, a performance orientation, which could lead to a 13-year-old girl stepping out and going to a place she shouldn't be. All of us have father wounds on some level. Even if you had a great father, you have a great father. I have a great father. That person, that father, is not able to give you everything you need. He will not be able to meet all these needs perfectly. And you will have the father wound. And can I tell you, if you don't deal with it, it will continually deal with you. So let's see what happens, though, when the fathers, I say fathers plural, there's two fathers, get on the scene. Genesis 34, verse 3, look at what it says. But then he, that's Shechem, the prince, the Shechem, Shechem and from Shechem, that guy. Then he, the guy that raped her, fell in love with her. He fell in love with Dinah. And he tried to win her affection with tender words. And he said to his father, Hamor, get me this young girl. I want to marry her. Verse 5, soon Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter, Dinah. But since his sons were out in the fields, herding his livestock, he said nothing until they returned. Hamor, Shechem's father, came to discuss the matter with Jacob. And Jacob and his sons, if you read the rest of the story, end up discussing the situation with Shechem and the Shechemites from Shechem. Get that? Shechem, the Shechemites from Shechem. Can I just tell you that if that was my daughter, we wouldn't be discussing anything. There ain't nothing to discuss. There'd be some fists being thrown, some bullets flying, something. I don't even know. I don't have any problem going back to prison. I'm just kidding. I ain't been in prison before. Okay? Chill. Chill. Seriously, though, we ain't discussing nothing. And the fact that Daddy, Jacob, even entertains this and discusses this is mind-blowing, mind-boggling to me. Why? Why would he have done this? And here's why. Because Dinah had been raped and defiled. Her value in that culture was taken away. She had no more value. And Jacob saw her as his property. And now the market for his property was way down. And he thought, you know what? I better get what I can for her right now. Even though it wasn't her fault. In that culture, Dinah was now stigmatized. She was taboo. Because the very thing that she had that was of value was stolen from her. There's a lot of things in our culture that are stigmatized, that are taboo. One of the things is psychology and counseling. We don't like the idea of going to see a counselor or going to see a psychologist. It makes us look weak. It makes us look like we don't have it all together, which is actually the very thing God wants. He wants us to admit that we're weak and that we don't have it all together. And some of us have so much pride that we won't go see somebody who can help us. And we'll keep living in these same patterns and these same cycles and repeating these things over and over again. And it's so unfortunate that we do that. It's taboo. Can I tell you, if you're listening to me right now, or maybe you're watching online and you think that you don't need to come next week and you don't need to be a part of what's going to happen after lunch, you're the very person that needs to be here. Because I can promise you, when you don't deal with stuff, one day it hits you. And then it's too late sometimes. And you got to do some deep surgery. Don't fall into the trap. Don't let pride sell you a lie that you don't need counseling. You don't need psychology. Now, we're not talking about the kind of psychology that science comes up with, that, all those things, whatever. I'm talking about psychology and counseling that leads to the solution of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ can heal your wound. He will heal your wound. But there's value in going back and thinking through things like the father wound. Jacob decides he better get what he can right now for Dinah, because the leverage that he once had in potential negotiations for his daughter is now gone. And of course, the other side knows they can get a great deal, right? How many of you like a good scratch and dent special? Huh? You go to Lowe's or somewhere, you're like, man, I need a new refrigerator. There's one over there on the side that's been returned or kicked a little bit. Like I could kind of slide that in there in the corner. You won't ever see that dent, right? That's what Dinah was in these people's eyes at this time, at this moment. The leverage that Jacob had to give her away, to basically sell her as a bride to a husband, is gone out the window. The leverage is gone. Can I tell you this, folks? God will never leverage your past against you. He bought the scratch and dent special, but he paid the highest price. He paid the highest price. He didn't go up to the register and say, hey, I need a discount because this thing's been kicked on the side, it's been returned. He said, no, I'm paying the highest price. I'm giving my son Jesus Christ for you, even though you're dented and you're scratched up. He paid the highest price. Leverage. He will never use your past against you. But can I tell you, the enemy will constantly leverage your past against you as long as you let him. He will remind you of things. He will cause things like depression and anxiety and panic attacks to come in your life because of things back in the past that you haven't dealt with. He will lie to you constantly. God will never leverage your past against you, but the enemy will all the time. But I will tell you this, although God will not leverage your past against you, he will leverage your past for you for your benefit. What does it mean? What does that mean? God will leverage your past for you. Think about the story, if you've heard of it. The woman at the well, right? Jesus meets this woman drawing water at the well. A woman that was a different race than him, and begins this conversation. And he tells the woman, like, listen, lady, you're getting water from this well, but I'm here to give you the kind of water that will cause you to never thirst again. And look at what she says in John 4:15. She says this, please, sir, the woman said, give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again. And I won't have to come get water. I want some of that water. Look at what he says in verse 16, Jesus. She says, go and get your husband, Jesus told her. Verse 17, she said, but I don't have a husband. The woman replied, and Jesus said, you're right, you don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with right now. You certainly spoke the truth. See, Jesus won't leverage your past against you, but he will leverage it for your benefit. We should not leverage anyone's past against them. We should not do that to do damage to people. But Jesus will show you yours to remind you of your need for him. Amen. Jesus saw value in looking back to the past and reminding her, listen, you ain't got it all together. You can't get it all together. But I got it all together for you. Amen. Anytime you start to think, folks, back in the past about things that have happened back then, instead of letting the enemy use that to get you down and cause you anxiety and make you depressed, why don't you just say to him right then, you know what? That's why Jesus died. He died for that. I know that was there. I know that happened. He died for that. He wiped that away. He washed that clean. Man, do we need Jesus. Don't leverage anybody's past against them to damage them. Don't do that. How about the other father in the story? So we got Jacob, right? But we have another father in the story, a guy by the name of Hammer. You know, instead of dealing justly with his son, now you can imagine if you have a son that had done that to a woman, man, there'd be some problems, right? But Hammer, instead of dealing with his son the way he should have, does something else. He enables his son. Shechem says, hey, Dad, I'd like to have her as my wife and do that, right? And Hammer's like, you know what? Let's do that. That's not a good idea. No, hey, you shouldn't have done that. You're wrong for that. You need to pay consequences. You need to be punished. No, hey, that's a good idea. Let's see if we can make that happen, right? He enables the behavior. Maybe that's you. Maybe you had a parent who didn't discipline you, let you do what you wanted. And now looking back on it today, you think, why didn't my parents love me enough to tell me no, to discipline me? Maybe Hammer was more of a friend than a parent. Oh. Word of caution, parents. Maybe later in life you can be your kid's friend, but when they're youngish, your role is not to be their friend. Don't enable the behavior. So just to summarize, Jacob and his other sons reached this agreement with Shechem, who's from Shechem, and the Shechemites, and Hammer to basically not only give Dinah to them, but also now to also intermarry with them, right? Intermarry with each other on one condition, that the Shechemites from Shechem get circumcised. And they agree. Here's the rest of the story. Genesis 34. Read this together. Verse 24. So all the men in Shechem and the town council agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in town was circumcised. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, gosh, I told you this was like PG-13. Two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dinah's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with their swords and then took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. That's kind of cringeworthy. But justice was done. But look at what Jacob did in Genesis 34, verse 30. Afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, who were the sons that took care of business, "You have ruined me." Oh my gosh. "You have made me stink among the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined, and my entire household will be wiped out." What kind of response? Verse 31, but the brothers said, "Hey, why should we let him treat our sister like a prostitute?" They retorted angrily. That's a good question. Jacob still no concern for his daughter. He's not worried about the trauma, the things that happened to her. No concern. Folks, don't be a Jacob. Don't be a Jacob. Stop the cycle. History will repeat itself if we let it. I just can't even imagine, I can't fathom the mentality that Jacob had. But the reality is, some of you have had parents that are similar to this. Some of you maybe have been parents that are similar to this. While you may not have done anything to this extreme, maybe you have, I don't know. This is the problem. No concern for his daughter. Understand this, a person's image of God, the Father, is contaminated by the personal experience he or she has with the birth father. How you look at God is greatly determined based off of how you look at your father. When misconceptions about God are present, that he's angry or judgmental or unhappy with me, or maybe he's legalistic or quick to punish, slow to forgive. A lot of that comes from the things that we saw our father do or not do whenever we were growing up. We tend to believe words like, "I'm not good enough. I'm guilty. I'm shameful. I must work harder to prove myself or to justify myself." But I'm reminded in 1 Peter 2:24, the word says that it is by his wounds, by Jesus' wounds, we have been healed. This morning, would you choose to forgive your father for hurtful words, for hurtful actions, for not loving you, for not blessing you, for maybe even affecting the image that you have today of God the Father? Would you forgive your father for that? As we bow our head and close our eyes, some of us, maybe right now, God's revealing to you that there's some things back there, specifically when it has to do with our parents, that we haven't dealt with yet. And that is affecting our current, our present, and it will affect our future. Some of us have mother issues. Imagine Leah. Imagine all she went through, all the trauma she experienced. I can't imagine. I can't put myself in her shoes. Of course, she wasn't able to give Dinah the love and the affection and the nurturing that she probably really needed. Would you forgive your mother this morning? Would you say to God in this room right now that this cycle stops with me? Would you tell God that God, I want to be set free from this. I want to be set free from the pain. I want to let go of the pain. I want to forgive my parents for the things that happened back then. God, would you give me the ability to see my parents through a different set of eyes? God, would you give me the ability to live in freedom and to let go of those things, let go of the bitterness and the hurt that's a part of that. Some of us in this room, we are that father. We are that mother. And in this moment right now, God is speaking to you. God is telling you, go to your children and make it right. Make it right. Whatever that looks like, whatever happened, make it right. Would you swallow the pride and all that stuff that you have and just go to your children and say, listen, I realize that I did the best that I could, but I couldn't do everything. I couldn't be everything you needed. Or maybe there was something way back then I need to apologize for. Would you go to your children, your grown adult children, and make peace with the past? Father, would you help us? God, we know that you are the good Father. And God, so many of us, we have a heart and we have a desire to be the kind of Father that you are. God, would you forgive us where we struggle? Will you forgive us as mothers where we fall short of what it is we should be doing or need to be doing? Would you help us to come to terms with the past and make peace with our past so we can be set free now and in the future? Would you stand up with